I was going to say he was coming all the way from Australia, but he's got a number of different locations, and he's coming to us from Greece today. So it's a first for Greece, and he's director of Tasks Consulting, a tender team, a bid team that can help you out win your government tenders, public tenders, private tenders, whatever it is. Great show in store for you today, because obviously you're under a lot of pressure to carry on the business on a day-to-day business. But have you looked at the avenue of tendering for large contracts or small contracts or government contracts? What does that look like? Have you just looked at it and went, you know what, that's not for me, there's too much administration? Or maybe you've kind of looked at it and went, you know what, I'll get to that at some stage. Well, Jason's going to give us a really good insight on the playbook of how you can do this successfully and how his company helps people do that successfully. Jason, welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to unpacking this one.
Cheers. Me too. Thanks for having me.
So give us a bit of a background then, where your career started and how you got to where you are today to have this fantastic business.
I started simply by completing university in marketing and getting a job like everyone does. Nobody in the marketing department where I was working wanted to write the tenders, so I put my hand up and wrote the tenders. And generally speaking, in most organizations, people kind of avoid tenders, so it's more fun in marketing, writing collateral and doing all the fun stuff. So for about 6 years, I was an in-house tender writer at a couple of different firms. One of them was construction, the other two were legal. And then I started freelancing as a tender writer. So started freelancing as a tender writer, and the majority of the phone calls that came in were from tradies or construction companies that were kind of small, medium business size. And they'd always call saying, never completed a tender before, need help. So I just kind of ended up accidentally specializing in construction bids.
Yeah, it really interests me, the whole tender side of things. I remember years ago just sitting at a printer for most of the day, and then putting binders together and trying to make out if you're a very creative person with your graphic designs and stuff like that. Back in the day. But when you think about it now, like, it was insane. The amount of paper that was used for tenders back in the day was crazy, wasn't it?
Yeah, you end up coming up with like a mini encyclopedia worth of documentation. And also your scheduling had to change because you needed 2 days buffer just to print and get it all together and deliver it. That's evolved since then, and I remember those days. Now it's mostly online, so it's a bit easier from that perspective. But it's the same 60 or 10 different supporting documents and main RFP and so forth. So you're still going to end up producing 300 to 600 pages every tender. Looks a lot, but it's quite simple. Yeah.
Like I remember the couriers just coming backing up to the office.
Yeah.
Loads. It's crazy stuff when you think about it.
And the other thing is, when you're dealing internally, so if you're working on a bid, the team doesn't know that you need a day buffer. So you let them know, hey, I really need a day buffer to print, to get this organized, get in on time. But they think, last minute they'll just print it and submit it. So that's always meeting the deadlines is always a challenge with tenders.
Big time.
Yeah.
Most definitely. Give me a quick. So say for example, obviously using a company like yourself will make things a lot easier and a lot smoother. But if someone hadn't got the resources, the time, the money, like give us a quick sort of a rundown on a tender drops into your folder or into your email. Maybe it's a government tender from an e-tender site, and what sort of mind frame would you tell the owner to be in if it's something that that's exactly what we do? What advice would you give as a start?
I would tell them the first thing to do is to check the mandatory criteria. So because each tender's got mandatory criteria, it might be insurances, it might be licenses, it might be specific experience. So I would say open the tender documents up. Don't worry about reading through the detail of the conditions because they can get intimidated by it. But find the mandatory criteria and make sure that you can deliver them. Make sure that you can adhere to them. Because from their mindset, it ticks off kind of 3 decisions. The first decision is, we're good. We can, we've got all the basic licenses. We cover all this. We can produce it. Let's go for it. The second is, we're totally out of our league. They want a minimum 3-year previous turnover of $1 million a year and we're only 300,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
We can't go for it. So you kind of get into no big decision, because you said they see it and they want to go for it. They think it's perfectly on ball, but we can either do it or we can't. And the third is, if we can't do it, do we need to team up with another subcontractor to, work in with them and pitch for it as a joint venture, particularly if there's just one little point, we can't do. It might be like a highly specialized works or something like that. So I'd say go straight to the mandatory criteria, get yourself the big tick off, and then, that'd be the first step. And then second step would obviously be, have a meeting with yourself. Depending on the size of your business, you might be, it might be a husband and wife team with five workers. It might be like a 25, 30 person team, whatever it may be. And then allocate your resources and figure out how long it's going to take you, and get a bit of a project plan and organize yourself to be able to submit like a good response.
Yeah, I from doing the tenders ourselves in our own company, we found that over the years we created this sort of formula, systematic approach of exactly what you just described there in our own way. We kind of look at it and go, scan it, and give it a quick, don't get too much caught in the weeds, but just scan it and see, is there any red flags there? They kind of go, no, that's not for us. Like, I suppose once you decide that it is for you, typical hours, what would you say typical hours to put together like a really good tender? What type of labor time are you talking about?
I'd say if we're talking about a small to medium-sized tender as well, might be for a local council or shire, then you're looking at six full days of work. So imagine 6, 8 to 48 hours. And that would need to be, 6 to 10. And that would need to be, if you've got, say, 3 weeks to respond, I would say 6 to 10 days, 48 to 60, 70 hours spread over that period of time. You definitely can't do it condensed, because you're always waiting for something to come in and so forth, feedback, stakeholders thinking. So I'd say, 6 to 10 days and spread over a period of 3 weeks. And then allocating as well, that's not depending on the size, but that's not including pricing. So I would say always treat pricing as something separate. So you've got to scope it out, you've got to price it. And then obviously you've got your program, you've got your previous experience and so forth. And if you can, in your organization, it might be an estimator that's going to do the pricing, it might be yourself that's going to do the rest of it. So you've got to kind of separate those two in your mind and then have them running concurrently.
Wow. I think when people hear that, they're going to go, shit, 50 hours. Like, it's a long time. But of course, if you've got your quality manager, if you have a quality manager involved, if you've got your project manager involved, if you've got your QS involved, those 50 hours are spread amongst all those team members. I think.
Of course. Yeah. And also, as you complete more tenders, so depending on the size of your business or even just how many you complete, you'll be quicker. There'll be a quality assurance questionnaire. If you're ISO certified, you can complete that in half an hour instead of 8, because you'll have all the documentation. The same with safety documentation. There's always going to be safety documentation. You complete it for one tender, you've got it ready for the next one. You answer the questionnaire and you move forward. And another key point is, every tender is going to ask for previous experience, but depending on the size of your business, you're always going to have previous experience that you've written for another tender, and you're going to say, I want to use that case study, and then you're going to be able to cut and paste it, put it in, tailor it a bit. So, at a minimum 20 hours once you know what you're doing and you've written a lot of tenders, but you wouldn't want to fall into the trap of not tailoring the tender. So what happens then is, I'll just quickly cut and paste the tender, chuck it together, or even get AI to write the tender, because AI can be useful for certain parts of the tender response to get like a bit of base information. But you get AI to write the tender, you think you're going well, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, hang on a sec, I haven't tailored it. And it's really obvious when they're reading it. So the best combination would be cut and paste and, getting a whole lot of messy draft content into a basic draft, and then start at the beginning and work through it and tailor it all. But definitely your project manager will develop the program. There might be a methodology. There's always a methodology in most construction tenders. So you get your project manager to write that. And once you spread it out, it kind of comes together. So it's reasonable.
Are you seeing any trends with the clients in regards to what you can and can't put into a tender? And what I mean by that, I find that when we do tenders as well, we would do European tenders, so they would follow a European format, and sort of like, it's pretty standard. But you see nuances and you see changes happening in tenders, and languages change and stuff like that. Maybe you could talk to us about some quirky stuff that might be out there, or not quirky stuff, but stuff that's happening?
Definitely. Big focus on whole of life cost management and innovation.
Whole of life, okay.
And you've really got to answer that properly, So if let's say we're bidding for a maintenance contract for 5 years, and it's for like 5 public buildings, and you've got to provide all the trade services. It's got the usual things about, okay, what are your call out times, emergency response, plumbing, whatever it may be. But then they want suggestions about, and then you've got your pricing as well. But what they want to know is, everyone's going to, you're going to have 5 or 6 competitors or even 10 competitors, and they're all going to come with the same service, right? We've got a team of 7 sparkies, electricians, 10 plumbers, and so forth, and we're going to respond. But what they want to know is, what are you going to do when you're like maintaining or upgrading the works to decrease the cost of maintaining that property or maintaining, the building over the life of the contract of the building? And when they ask you that, and they ask you about innovation, what they're saying is, it's really directly linked to pricing. But what it's saying is, if you're going to quote us $1 million now, and $1 million every year, it's going to cost us to clean. For example, our cleaning contract's going to go up $200,000 a year. And then someone else is going to quote us $1.1 million now, but for the next 5 years, we're looking at 300,000 instead of $1 million, or, substantially less maintenance because there's cheaper cleaning, because you've laid down a product that it doesn't need to be cleaned. There can be no damage. You might be replacing louvres. One person might have suggested louvres and they're impossible to clean. And then one person might have suggested normal windows, or you might have innovation. For example, recent tender I was working on, there was going to be a trafficable roof. And they talked about using a product that would be 75 mil fit, not 150. It was decreasing cost, but it maintains the trafficability of the roof. So things like that, where you're thinking and you're suggesting and you're talking about the real cost and looking at the project as a whole instead of just a one-off cost is important. And that's one trend that we're seeing a lot of. And it means that the buyers are a bit more sophisticated and they've thought about it, and they're not going to directly go to the cheapest price, as long as you explain why you might be more expensive up front, than others, but cheaper over the long run. There's been a little bit of like declaring if you use AI creeping in. So they want to know if you're using it and which parts of the tender you're using it and so forth, and why. We're not sure, what they're kind of thinking about with that, because they are using AI in procurement a bit. But okay, I suppose they don't want anything completely generic, and they can usually tell anyway if you've just gotten Google Gemini to write it all. But it is helpful. Another point I would say that's creeping into tenders, not really sure. Yeah, I'd say they're the big 2 off the top of my head.
Well, there's a big social value. There's
social value is enormous. Social values, sorry, I forgot. Yeah. That's the biggest one. Okay, so with social value, the key points, especially in the UK. So with social value, the key points is it needs to be measurable. So there's no more of the we're going to help this charity and that charity and we're going to do this and that, because if you can't measure it, then you can't make big remarks. The second one is it needs to be achievable, so they can see through if it's not achievable, and they won't respect it. And they know when they're reading it that a company of this size may, really won't be able to achieve whatever they're going to put forward. So it needs to be measurable. It needs to be achievable. The other point with social value is it's not directly, you can't it's not directly related to accidental or incidental benefits to the community because of the work you're doing. So you can't say, we're just, we're tendering to rebuild the school and this is going to help the school and all the rest of it. It needs to be like real initiatives that are going to be put forward. And you need to show that you've done your homework and the work involved in delivering those social values initiatives. So say there's training involved for young apprentices. It's not like the old days where you say, we're going to appoint 2 new apprentices because of this contract and we're going to train them up. You need to identify which apprentice organisation you're going to be, or training organisation you're going to be working with, what skills they're going to be learning on the project, and what else you're going to do, and what program you're going to be doing to train and so forth. So social values, an interesting one, but to summarise it is you can't fluff it anymore, and people used to fluff it, and it's got to be backed by evidence, and it's got to be achievable, and it's got to be concrete. So we generally think that, with the trend in social value now, the other point is you can't underestimate it. So there's 10%, usually 10%, and if not more in the weighting criteria focused on social value, and it can be make or break. Yeah, it's pretty much standard 10% now, and it can be make or break from a tendering perspective, which means you have to respect it and you have to take it seriously. It's kind of like environmental used to be. So when we had clients in environments that were like, yeah, whatever, I know my job. just to answer some fluffy stuff for environmental, and we don't know what they're doing. And then they turn around and, we've had clients that have turned around and said, okay, I lost to a competitor that I know is inferior. They're going to probably end up subbing it off to me. The council or the government organizations know they can't deliver, but they've scored well in environmental and social value, so they're beating the tender on the overall score. So they're winning tenders. So it's definitely a big one.
Yeah, I know of a company, and they employ ex-offenders and people with disabilities and stuff like that. Like they went out of their way to go down the social value route because they were looking at government contracts as well, and it's worked really well for them. It actually has become a pretty good in terms of both for the individual but also for winning more work. Like if you're not in that space of looking at social value, kind of really you're missing the boat, because there's as you say, 10% is a lot of percentage. And they will
most definitely.
Some of these guys will insist that you take on local labor as well anyway. Well, they all will pretty much, won't they, in terms of who you bring on the job.
Yeah, local labour is something that's now standard. And the key point is, okay, so local labour is standard, but to go the extra mile and score extra, you really need to show how you're going to find that local labour. If there are any disadvantaged groups that you're going to target to recruit, labour from there, at what levels and in what roles you're looking at employing people, and most importantly, what are they going to get out of it? What training, what expertise are you going to transfer to the local community? Because you're not only employing them for the job, but you're also up-training them. So, by the end of our project, especially when you're talking about some 1.5-year projects, this local person is going to get whatever degree or whatever qualification out of it, and we're going to put him through this qualification for this period of time. And the second big point is local suppliers, because social value, it's not only the people, but it might be purchasing off local suppliers. It might be you doing the hard work, saying, okay, I'm going to Google and I'm going to find a local supplier that's a disability organisation, and we're going to, it might not be your building contract supplier, but just say your building material supplier is going to be the local supplier of building materials. Okay, firstly, you're going to check his social value, and you're going to disclose in the tender that, okay, we spoke to them and they employ someone from disadvantaged group or whatever it may be. So that's the first thing, that you're actually thinking about who you're buying off and what they do. And the second point is there are a lot of ancillary things that costs and supplies that you need for a construction project, be it stationary, be it safety equipment, anything, tools and so forth. So what other organizations that you can purchase off locally and also from social demographic perspective that you can help out. So it's all important. It might even be food for lunches, where you're going to get them from for your team, and doing a bit of research around that helps. So the whole kind of theme is just putting the work into the tender to write a RIPA response for social value.
Yeah, and the other thing that I suppose I've noticed is that if you don't have a flow in your tender, and you kind of touched off it earlier on, like the reader won't get the flow either. It's and that's where they see that you've just bolted in this bits and pieces, and you haven't actually got a sort of a workflow methodology of how your tender comes together. That is an art, I think, though, Jason. That's like where companies like yourself kick in. It's not something that you pick up fairly easy. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd probably agree with that. Yeah, I think if a listener kind of like wanted to do it themselves, the recommendation I would give to give it a crack is wait till the end of the tender and then go through from start to finish and write it in a consistent tone the whole way. So if it's I am going to do this, then write I am going to deliver this, whatever. If it's we, it's we. If it's our company, don't know. If you want to refer to the third person, whatever it is, make sure it's consistent. And the other point, the big point, is that when you're developing the bid, you're going to develop like 3 or 4 win themes in the bidding world, we call them, but key messages, key sales points, whatever you want to call it. 3 or 4 of those that are going to be consistent throughout, that really need to get through to the reader. It might be that you're focused on safety. It might be this big social value initiative that you've got. It might be that you're bidding to build a school and you worked on that school. You've worked on the school for the last 20 years, so you know the school so well that you can be more efficient than others. And it might be that you've got some fantastic new product that's going to decrease the time for construction and enable you to deliver the job more efficiently. But those 4 things have to be consistently pushed throughout the tender response, even in some of the questions that don't directly ask for them, so that you've got like a consistent interwoven messaging through the bid. But if you kind of bolt it together without doing that and without having like the consistent messaging, then it does feel disjointed, and it's something that they can kind of read into, and your language as well. So just keep the language consistent. I mean, we like to tell people that it doesn't matter if your language that you're using is sophisticated or simple, as long as you use the same kind of similar language throughout the doc. So if you're writing it off AI or you're cut and pasting it from someone else, when they're reading, they're like, oh, something's happened here. But if you've used simple English and it's all credible, then it's fine. You don't need any fancy words. Just keep it for yourself to some extent.
The same narrator basically needs to narrate the whole tender. So if you're thinking about appointing somebody to write up the tender, that same person has to write that tender right the way through, as opposed to, okay, we'll send it over to that department and let them do their bit. And that's a great point, actually. Yeah, I never actually looked at that. And the other thing that we haven't done, but we should do probably, is creating a sort of a library of questions that we're constantly getting asked the same thing, and then refining those answers so that we have a bank of standardized responses to pretty much the same questions. Is that something that you would do, or?
That's something that we usually just accidentally and automatically set up for clients. When I was in the in-house world 20 years ago and I was working for a company, I had my 3 super tenders, which I knew had asked every question because they were the biggest tenders we'd ever worked on. And I used to always go back to them for the responses because they kind of covered everything. But the best thing to do is create a central repository, Word document, whatever it may be. You can put it in, you can use more complex software, but essentially every time you work on a tender, just cross-check new tender, just cross-check if that information is in the previous, your central kind of question bank, and anything that isn't, you add in, so that you're constantly updating it and you're constantly refining it. And I generally tell people, and we do this for a lot of clients, just do a short and a long version for each question, because you're very often asked for a short response, or you can go into a lot of detail, and there's no need to have the in-between. You just keep it short and long, and then if there's ever an in-between, you get the long version, you condense it down and you tailor it and you submit it. But it certainly makes you more efficient, and it'll stop you looking for like a question a year ago when you know somebody asked it and you can't remember what tender it was in and so forth.
That's an interesting one that you touched off as well. Is there software for helping you do this stuff, or is there sort of anything out there in the market?
Yeah. There are about, I think now there are like 162 RFP writing software packages, all competitors.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a massive market. We still work off. We prefer the large suppliers, and we don't even use the software. So we use either Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, one of those. You can use different ones depending on the level of confidentiality you want. But built off the standard kind of software packages, there are like a lot of suppliers that are marketing, and it depends. Majority, the core part of it is pretty much everything in a Word document with all your content and all your responses, but they do make it a bit more user-friendly. But I think the keys is, especially for small businesses that, don't want to like subscribe to plans left, right, and center and so forth. I think the key is if you've got everything stored in Word and you've got some basic knowledge on something that you don't know, that you can like type into ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever and get some basic response or form, they're the 2 kind of real tools you need. So the ability to search Google and use some basic AI, and somewhere to store your document in Word or any other format, or if not, integrate software and see if it can make it easier for you.
That's great. That's a great tip. So none of these softwares really replace what you guys do. How does that complements your business? I take it, does it?
Yeah, I'd say it may replace, some of the software packages would replace 30% of what we do. So to some extent, they're helpful. I think I'd say 30 to 40%, but I would say also that ChatGPT and Gemini and any of those, Claude, whatever they use, that kind of replaces about 40% of what we do as well. which we don't mind. Like there's enough work and so forth. So they replace a little bit. So I'd say from a tender writing perspective, we 30 or 40% of our clients would probably now deliver us something a bit better in terms of ideas. Or what often happens is we'll ask, we need some input, and then they'll go into GPT, type something, and then send us that, and then we end up having to rework it. Sometimes it means that we have to rewrite it all, but other times it is helpful. So I wouldn't say it's don't use it or anything like that. And for certain questions, we've got like template information anyway. So it's either they type it into ChatGPT or Gemini or something and then deliver us 600 words, or we use our existing response and cut and paste it in and then rewrite that. Either way, we're rewriting something. I mean, we don't charge them for the time if we're just cutting and pasting something in. So it ends up similar, but it can be quicker and give a bit of an advantage. So yeah, it's helpful. I wouldn't say it's not helpful, but it certainly doesn't you can't just win a tender based on it. You can probably get about a first draft together on maybe 70% of the questions. So it can save you a lot of time there. But when it comes to actually writing and winning, they need to sit there and do it. Yeah. Or get us to, or do it. They can do it themselves. Yeah.
Is there still a theory out there that, some of these tenders are sent out and there's so much, how would I put it? It's constructed in such a way that it tries to deter people, the tire kickers, if you like, from getting involved in the tender process, that they really go into the minutiae and try and actually just sort of wear you down so that you don't actually put in a tender. Is there any truth? Is there that model still mindset of the buyer? Is that still out there? Like get us inside the mind of a buyer in that regard, or in
if it's a government buyer, so let's say a government procurement department, and if it is the UK, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, no, because it's so formalized now and so regimented in what procurement has to do that they can't really get away with that. They may have, and if anything, there are new laws coming in, I think in UK and also in Australia, where they're making it easier, like SMEs, so small, medium enterprises, get bonus points for bidding. Businesses in regional locations get bonus points. So I would say that theory, I don't think holds up to, I don't know, $100 million tenders. But when you're talking about $100 million and above, and you're talking about mega construction projects and so forth, then your no bid process really needs to kick in, because you shouldn't be going for them if you're not able to go through the process. And they are long term. They take 9 months to prepare. There's EOI stage and so forth. Those ones, just by their very nature, are prohibitive. And only the tier one construction companies would even invest the time, money, and have the motivation to go for them. So to some extent, but I wouldn't say it's because of the buyers thinking that. It's just because they, like, it's size and it's proportional. And the other point I'd say is, when you look in the private sector, it's a bit different, and even some parts of the public sector, that of course there are existing relationships. So of course, to an extent, an incumbent would have an advantage if they've got a real relationship and so forth. But where that shines through in a tender, in a UK or any government tender, is where they ask for your previous experience, and they're providing direct and relevant previous experience. So they score well there. So if your competitor's scoring a 9 out of 10 and you're going to be scoring a 7.5. That's not because the buyer's got some preference, but they'll just score them higher because their experience is more relevant and so forth. So what you've got to do is you've got to score well on social value, you've got to score well on the other parts, and you've got to really educate the buyer in your experience section about how your experience is similar to what they're asking for. And a lot of the time, we're helping like tradies or small construction businesses that have never won a government tender. So they'll say, "Oh, mate, I've never won one. I've lost 3. I keep losing. I don't know why." And then we say, "Okay, what private sector experience you got?" And they would have, they would have worked on a local school for like a very small contract and not put it in, and said, "Oh, I've built 10 massive houses." I'm like, okay, but from the government's perspective, that small bit of education experience is really important, because the government cares about how you're going to communicate, how you're going to report, how you're going to manage the contract, what about safety, what about your protocols. And the private home builder, won't care about that. So sometimes you've got to really spell out to the client when you're writing the bid why your experience aligns and is similar, and it's not based on the size or your experience, it's just the scope and the client type that kind of impacts it. And that's how you can kind of they can win them that they would normally think they'll automatically lose and think, oh, maybe it's because it was a pre-thought out outcome, whatever it may be. But, it's just a technical thing.
Yeah, I actually, someone recently, well, a couple of months ago, approached me and said, look, how are you doing these tenders? Like, it was a government tender that they should well be able for. And they got to a point within the tender and it was asking them certain questions on health and safety. And they weren't geared up for that side of the business in terms of dealing with the legislation. And he said, well, we're not going to do it because we don't have that. And I was saying, government tenders, like, obviously from a legal point of view, these are highly scrutinized. So the legal side of the person producing that tender from the government side of things would have said you need to include this, and this as per the law and as per statutory requirements. And I couldn't get over the conversation because what I was saying to the individual was that's actually an opportunity for you to put in more costs over and above what you were going to put in. And he was like, well, how do you mean? I said, well, like they're actually giving you direction to hit them with a cost in order to tick that box. And instead of his mindset was, oh, but I'm not going to do it because they're asking me to do this.
Yeah.
You can buy, as you said earlier on, you can buy that service in.
Yeah, they can. I mean, when it comes to health and safety and quality, you can download the templates and tailor them, like current compliant templates for toolbox meetings, for safe work method statements, for absolutely everything. And then within like a couple of hours, you've got a semi-compliant response. And even if you aren't ISO certified, as long as you start the process for ISO certification, then which is just engaging and starting the process, so it doesn't cost a lot, then you turn around and say to the government, well, we've already got all the documentation. It mirrors the requirements of ISO that you've requested. We've also started the accreditation process and we're ready to go. And then, worst case scenario, they find one minor variation in the template documentation that you've got, but it's definitely achievable. There's no, from that perspective, there's no real reason for someone not to bid for a tender, be it a work health and safety, a quality, or a environmental question, which are usually the three that they all kind of go, oh, this is too hard. Or they can get us to help with it, or they can download a pack. Even if they download a pack of documents, we can tailor it for them, so it's quick. And now cybersecurity's crept in a little bit, but again, they can kind of write a response to that. So yeah, I wouldn't see it as a deal breaker, and it's unfortunate when people go bid for it just for that reason.
Yeah, well, and the other thing that I've learned over the years is the buyer actually wants you to succeed in putting together a really good tender bid. Whether you win that or not is another thing, but they don't want to have situations where there's a curveball of you maybe winning the tender and then something happens within the operation when you kickstart the contract, and you go, well, hold on a minute, I didn't price for that, because that makes them look bad. Well, people probably don't think it is, but that actually makes the buyer look bad that they didn't actually have that factored in their contract documentation, because now somebody's job is on the line for not identifying that. Have you come across that much?
Most definitely. And if there's insufficient scope, usually there's a question and answer period, and in that period, you should really take advantage to ask what are included in the works and what aren't. And I had a question. I was working on a tender today, Australian one. It was education, and they actually asked, in all your previous examples, let us know what the contract value was, if there were any value variations, and to what extent there were any variations. So they even look at your track record in terms of scoping it out properly, then providing you enough detail, and then not no unnecessary variations, or what were the reasons for them. So the buyers are smart, but they definitely want, the last thing that they want is, because in the government sector, they're obliged to read the tender in full. So the last thing that they want is somebody who hasn't given the tender a good shot, or hasn't priced it properly because of the after effect that would have when it comes to operations, comes to implementation. And the other thing that they don't like, I've attended like lots of workshops with procurement personnel from different government departments. And the other thing they hate is generic fluff in the tender responses, because they have to sit there reading them all. So they like bullet points and full stops and conciseness. And one person actually said to me, I have to sit there reading, and he goes, I know it was, all bullshit. but I'm reading the whole thing because they're obliged to a lot of the time, and they're obliged to read it, score it, and mark it. So you've got to make it easy for them to read, but they certainly don't want to hurt you. And you can often read between the lines in terms of what they're looking for, or sometimes they put in explicitly, we don't want any general marketing collateral. Let us know if something's, if you need any clarification on what needs to be priced, let us know prior to this date so that we can answer it for everybody, and then the tenders will be submitted a week later or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I suppose in this day and age, there's always the clarification period between the buyer and the seller in terms of, okay, do we need to clarify anything here? Do we need to? And we, as a company, would always insist that we have a sort of a workshop prior to actually kicking the contract off with all the stakeholders. We would suggest, as if they don't suggest it, we were the ones that would push it and say, no, we want to do a kickoff meeting, a workshop meeting with your team, and we want to just go the extra step past the clarification stage to understand the logic, because sometimes you don't know why this tender was put out there, and it's good to get the backstory as well. And we found that when you do these kind of workshops that you described there as well, you kind of, okay, the reason why they went out to tender is because the previous guy messed up, or legislation has changed, or they've went through a cultural shift within the company and now they've recognized that this is an issue.
Notice it all the time, particularly the previous guy messed up theory. And the best part about that one is they'll tell you the reason. And then you get the big indicator of what they're looking for. And the other point is when pricing is too low, they do get suspicious of it. I think, hang on a sec, does this guy know what they're doing? Because there's a lot of work involved. And we used to pay X person this amount, and they're coming in 30% cheaper. And they start to think, okay, 30% cheaper means either that they're just getting in there so that they can charge us variations and try to extend the contract and so forth, or 30% cheaper means that it's not going to be a quality job, or they haven't scoped out exactly what they want or what we want. So, there's a direct link between those, any pre-workshops, any clarifications, and your pricing. And pricing is certainly an important indicator to demonstrate your knowledge of the scope of the services that are required, whatever it may be.
Yeah. Another thing that I noticed as well, Jason, I don't know if you can speak to it, is in the government tenders especially, they actually list if it's a request for tender, or it actually hasn't gone to full tender stage. They generally list the budget that they've set aside for this contract. So you kind of work your way back from that, and you kind of go, well, there's the figure. It's 10 million. So you need to be in the ballpark of 10 million. So they've already set a budget aside for this. So you've kind of got that information. Is that a standard that they have to do that?
No. Well, not always. Or if there is a budget, the pricing can vary. And the pricing, it used to be, depends, in the UK, it used to be based on, best available price, but now it's best weighted. So it is. It depends which country and which jurisdiction it is, and it can be a good indicator. But you want to scope it out and price it properly based on your own business. And so if they've provided like kind of 10 million, well, it gives you a good ballpark.
Yeah.
It gives you a good ballpark indicator, especially to ask a question like, is something wrong here? And it does depend on how much work they've done on their end to figure it out. Unless, of course, you're talking like a released end of financial year tender where they've got to use their budget up before the end of the financial year. That happens sometimes in government. So if it's not that, then it does happen, but I wouldn't use it as a major guide or a guide for pricing, so to speak.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Talk to me then on pricing. Like, should you allow a certain percentage buffer because you're always going to get hit with a knockdown question after you get into the first hurdle or the second hurdle of the tender stage?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's a very good question. Being hit with a BAFO, or best and final offer, or knockdown, whatever it may be, is something which you really have to think through. And a lot of the time we tell people to stay the course. But the problem is, because it's an emotional, it plays with your emotion, because you're down to the top three and you're about to win it. And then you kind of drop and you think, oh, I'm going to drop it, and so forth. I would say the most important point is, if you're a small, medium kind of builder or tradie, whatever it may be, to ensure that you and you haven't worked on government before, to ensure you include a buffer of 10% or 15 or 20 or 5, whatever, some kind of buffer to cover all the additional administration and reporting that's associated with the government contract. Because it's not going to be as easy as dealing with a private enterprise. There are more reporting requirements. They're stricter. They want to know everything. So you have to build in a buffer for that and not underestimate it unless you've got previous government experience. You can build in a buffer for pricing, or in case there's a buffer. It can help. Alternatively, you can just go in with your solid price and then stick to it. But if you are going to go in with your product price and stick to it, if they try to knock you down, then you've got to have a couple of other innovations or value-added services that you can add in to say, no, we can't reduce our price because we did it properly. And we don't do that. We don't allow buffers. You can tell them we simply priced it, with our standard margin and so forth. But here are a couple of other extras that are going to be a value-added service to you, whatever it may be. It might be your, some audit, some consultation from some of your estimate, anything, right? So that's one point. The second point is if someone engaged us as a tender writers, right? Or if you're writing a tender yourself, you'd like to think that if your pricing is market and your pricing reflects 40% rating criteria or 30% rating criteria, say it's 30% or 40%, then your pricing is market and you score 36 out of 40, your competitive pricing, but you've scoped it out properly, and someone else comes in with a score of 40 out of 40 because they've decreased their price substantially, you'd want to be better than them on the 60% evaluation criteria for the tender, and with an explained justification of your price that you still win the tender. So, combining 36, if they're going to get 40 out of 40 and they're going to get 60 out of 60, then they're at 100. But realistically, if they pull 40 out of 40 on all the other aspects, they might score 50 out of 60. So they're on 90. So if you come in as a 36 out of 40 because you haven't just discounted it to lose money on a tender response, you've priced it properly and you've priced it where your competitors that are serious have also priced it, then you need to write a good solid tender response to get 56, and then all of a sudden you're at 96 or whatever it may be. So pricing, I think, best works if it's a bit below market if you really want the work, a bit above market if you're that busy that you kind of whatever, and with a good tender. Substantially above market if you're really busy with a good tender is also fine. If you say, we'll price it high and see what happens, we might win it. And it's also important to explain your pricing and any reasons why it's higher. So whole of life cost, your A team is going to be coordinating it. You got your best builders, the products you're going to use, materials, anything like that. Any extras and so forth, really good social value. There's all different ways you can justify higher pricing. But if you're going to go for lower, slightly lower than market, it's fine. But really low pricing to win work, you're kind of asking for trouble as an organization because you've got to make money out of these contracts, not just win them. Yeah. And it's easy for us as tender writers to say, price low so you can win work. But we're not the ones 6-9 months later dealing with a bottom line probably cost money on a job. So, anyone tender writer that tells you I should price it low, grow your business, they don't care about your real bottom line, which is profit. So we like to say price normal and let's try and win it. Do a good job of the tender and try and win. That's the pricing strategy I push for, but it can be tailored depending on your business situation.
I also had a previous experience with somebody who were going to put in a tender, didn't have time to put the tender in because the tender came out of the blue and they felt that they didn't have the sufficient time. Now they were well able to do that job if they got the tender. And I remember saying to them, well, there's an email address of a person that's dealing with that tender. Email the person, give them ample notice that you would love to do the tender, but you don't have the time and capacity right now because of the short duration or because of personal reasons or whatever it is. And I remember talking to him a couple of months later and I said, how did you get on with that? Did you send that letter in? And he said, you know what, Gavin? No, we didn't. And he says, you're never going to guess what, but nobody actually tendered for that particular framework.
Wow. It's okay. So that's depends on size, but I'd say for the small to medium tenders, you can definitely do that. And why not? Like pop an email in, tell them the reasons and ask for an extension straight away. There's no problem with it. And if you profile and in the meter, just profile yourself. Listen, we're the local builder. or the local organisation, we specialise in this area. We're a serious player, but we don't have time for this reason or that reason, so we request an extension like almost immediately. And then they either grant it or not. At least if they don't grant it, they know who you are and so forth. It's worth a shot. For larger tenders, the other point is if they decide not to bid for it, like some national, Australian or UK, even an EU tender, if they decide not to bid for it, just because they haven't got time, just keep an eye on it, because half the time they extend them by 2 weeks anyway. So there's a last minute extension. So that may be that you're so busy tendering, completing a job. Okay, you decide not to bid because you don't have the resources, time, fair enough. But watch the notifications and the addendums, because they're more than likely going to be a 2-week extension on it. You can always complete it in 2 weeks if you've got capacity.
Yeah, I think, I can't remember, but I do think there's I don't know what the percentage is, but there is a large percentage of tenders that actually people don't tender for.
Yeah, they don't tender for. Yeah.
It's insane when you think about it.
Yeah, that's tender search.
Tender search, is it?
Yeah, well, what happens is a lot of time they don't find them. So unfortunately, you've got a whole lot of small businesses. Like in the UK, like for example, we've got another kind of small organisation where we find tenders for people. It's like a service that grew out of our service. But essentially what happens is you've got so many tradies that don't actively monitor the tenders. So for some clients, for example, like we don't even write their tenders. All we do is help them find tender opportunities. And the reason is because they'll log on and they'll register at Find Me a Tender or whatever, all the different government websites, but they won't have time to monitor them. They won't have time to find the one that suits them. They won't even, sometimes the description in the tender doesn't actually indicate the services. So it might be like facilities management or maintenance works on, and the electrician doesn't click because he doesn't have the time to look into it and say, oh, okay, this is basically 95% electrical. This is perfect for me. And all I need to do is hire like a fire electrician that specializes in fire for one, but it's nothing. So they miss them. And then when they miss them, everyone misses them, especially small, medium businesses. Half the problem is actually identifying and finding the tender opportunities and then cleaning through them. And you don't have time. They might be sitting there on a Friday arvo going, oh shit, I just, better read all the tenders that came through, and they couldn't be bothered, and then they miss it, and that's it. They don't, and it's on a silver platter. So they ended up getting no bidders because larger companies often won't waste their time on smaller $100,000 or $250,000 contracts. And smaller businesses don't actively look for them sometimes, or might not get across them. And so you end up having a situation where there's no bidder. It happens often in the EU. There's a reasonable percentage of tenders that go no one bids for them, and it's mainly, I think, because of the tender identification side of it. Isn't comprehensive enough on the business's parts.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jason, I'm going to throw a few curveballs at you because we're nearly at the end of the show. If you don't
okay,
mind.
Cool.
Knowing what you know now, Jason Cooney, what would you do different in life?
I would become a naval architect, and I would travel.
Right.
More.
A naval architect. Yeah. We have to ask.
Naval architect design. Because I get excited every time I see ships. I was like, oh, that ship's awesome. It's kind of like when you work in a tender, you work on a big project like the NEOM in Saudi Arabia or something, but I'm the maritime version.
Brilliant. I love it. A favorite book?
Would be Saving Private Ryan. I think they wrote a book about it, and I read it, and it was a good one. So Saving Private Ryan, the book.
The book. Very good. You probably answered this already, but a point of interest about you that not many people would, or the viewers and listeners mightn't resonate with, or mightn't go, geez, I've never seen that with Jason. Could be
something that I'm interested in. Spearfishing. Snorkeling, spearfishing. I grew up spearfishing. Yes, it's another weird one. But I go spearfishing. So it's a kind of unlikely hobby.
Wow. That's just thrown me.
Yeah, sorry about
that. Do you go other people to do that, or you just do it yourself?
Go alone. They say to go with a buddy, so I'll usually go with a mate. But yeah, we go out and catch fish. I'd say it's the most sustainable form of fishing because we work for like 1.5 to 2 hours just to catch one fish. So I'm not the most successful at it, but when we catch one, we're happy. But we work hard for our catch.
So, because I'm come from a different world, are we talking about a spear gun or
spear gun? Yeah,
spear gun. Okay.
Yeah, snorkeling. So I don't go diving, just snorkeling.
Okay.
Out outside the rocks and out into the ocean with a spear gun to try and catch dinner, and then maybe cook it on the beach.
Oh, wow.
that type of thing. Or if we're in Greece, catch an octopus. Yeah, maybe not
Wow.
an octopus. We'll stick to the fish. I feel sorry for the octopus, but I'd definitely go the fish.
Jason, that's brilliant. I love that. I absolutely love that. That's brilliant.
Cool.
That's definitely going to be one in our top list of.
Okay, cool.
Listen, if people want to get in touch with you, why would they want to do it? We're going to put all your stuff in the show notes, all of your links and everything else. What's the best way to contact you, and maybe give us a speak of yourself and your company?
Yeah, sure. So in Australia, we're the tender team, but in the UK and Europe, we're tax consulting, TSAKS consulting. I think on my Australian website, I've got my Australian WhatsApp number and my phone number, obviously. And I'm always on WhatsApp answering questions with clients. And on our in the UK, we've got an office, so they can call or email. We're tender writers, so if, emails get responded to in like an hour all the time. I'm addicted to my phone, so always check an email. So so email the tender team or email tax consulting, our UK office, and I watch all the emails, so they come through to me.
Brilliant, Jason. It was an actual pleasure having you on the show, and we could have went on further, to be honest with you, because there was other questions I would have liked to ask. If people have any questions, I'm sure Jason's happy to answer anything that might have come out of the show. Wish you the best and all the success.
Cheers.
Jason, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very, very much for having me. It's been awesome and interesting. So thank you.
Thank you.